He is crouched in a wall of brush along a riverbank in the Pacific Northwest when the first shape breaks through the far tree line. His phone is already recording, braced against a branch, because he thought he was filming a bear. But the shape does not drop to all fours. It walks upright, shoulders forward, carrying a full-grown white-tailed deer draped across its back, gripping the legs with hands that have no business being on anything with a canine skull. A second dogman. Holding the deer, the man holds his phone steady for 3 seconds of clean footage before panic takes over, and he pulls branches across the lens, pressing himself deeper into the bush, leaves and reddish stems flooding the foreground of the frame as the dogmen pass within what feels like shouting distance. The clip cuts to black. Because the man's breathing got so loud on the audio, he was afraid the sound itself would give him away. And what those 8 seconds contain has changed the way I personally think about what dogmen are, what they do, how they organize, and how close they operate to the places we assume are safe. So before we continue, make sure you subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. The man behind the camera goes by the name Dale. That is not his real name. He asked that his identity stay buried, and I'm going to respect that, because after you hear what happened to him in the weeks following that recording, you will understand why he does not want his name attached to any of this. Dale is in his mid-40s. He lives in a small town near the Oregon-Washington border in a part of the Pacific Northwest, where the towns are small, the forests are deep, and the distance between your front door and genuine wilderness is measured in minutes, not hours. He is not a hunter. He is not a cryptid researcher. He is not someone who spends his evenings on forums arguing about Bigfoot print casts or debating whether the Patterson-Gimlin film is real. He is an amateur wildlife photographer who has spent years, the better part of a decade, filming osprey, river otters, kingfishers, and the occasional black bear from a stretch of river. He knows better than most people know their own backyards. He has a routine. He parks at a pull-off along a county road that barely qualifies as paved, hikes about 20 minutes along a deer trail that is not marked on any map, and sets up in a natural blind on an elevated bank about 15 feet above the waterline. The spot overlooks a bend where the river shallows out over a bed of smooth stones, a natural crossing point that animals have been using for longer than anyone has been alive to watch them do it. Deer use it. Elk have used it. He has filmed coyotes trotting across it at dawn with wet fur and no concern in the world. He has watched a black bear sow bring her cubs to the far bank and let them play in the shallows while she stood guard. He knows every tree, every rock, every angle of light at every hour of the day from that position. It is his spot. He considers it one of the last truly private places he has access to, a place where the forest does not know it is being observed and behaves accordingly. On this particular day, late May, overcast, warm, the kind of Pacific Northwest afternoon where the clouds sit low enough to feel like a ceiling, he arrived around 3 o'clock. He parked at his usual pull-off, hiked the usual trail, and set up in his usual blind with his phone mounted on a small flexible tripod clamped to a branch. He settled in, adjusted his angle, and waited the way he always waited, patient, quiet, scanning the far bank and the tree line for movement. The first thing he noticed was the silence. No osprey circling above the river, no kingfishers working the shallows, no songbirds in the canopy, no insects buzzing in the brush around him. The river was running, but the forest around it had gone completely, absolutely still in a way he had never experienced at that location in nearly 10 years of visiting it. He told the research group later that it was not just quiet, it was empty, like someone had turned the volume knob on the entire forest down to 0. He noted it. He filed it in the back of his mind, and he told himself it was probably a bear. A black bear moving through the area would push the smaller animals into silence. He had seen it before. He figured he would get good footage if he waited it out. I want to pause here because this detail matters more than almost anything else in this story. Every single dogman encounter I have covered on this channel, everyone, going back to the very first video I made, shares one thing in common, and it is the silence before the sighting. The birds stop. The insects stop. The small mammals that are usually rustling through the underbrush go dead still. The forest doesn't gradually get quieter. It shuts off. It is as if every living thing in a quarter-mile radius gets the same signal at the same moment and decides collectively that the safest thing to do is shut up, hold still, and wait for whatever is coming to pass through. And every single time the person sitting in the middle of that silence notices it, they register it, they think about it, and they do not leave. We are so conditioned to being at the top of the food chain that when the environment screams at us in the only language it has that something is wrong, that something bigger and more dangerous than us is nearby, we rationalize it. We tell ourselves it is a bear. We tell ourselves it is a change in weather. We tell ourselves we are imagining things. Dale did exactly that. He sat in that silence for 30 minutes, telling himself it was a bear. And then the tree line across the river opened up, and his life changed permanently. The deer held by the dogmen was clearly dead, head hanging completely limp, swinging with the motion of being carried. No visible mauling along the body, no torn flesh, no blood trail dripping into the water. Dale said later that the neck looked like it had been broken cleanly, a single decisive action rather than the ragged tearing that a predator's jaws produce. The deer looked almost intact. It did not look like something that had been hunted by an animal. It looked like something that had been dispatched by a professional. That detail alone kept Dale awake for weeks after the encounter, because it implied a level of precision and control that went beyond predatory instinct and into something he did not have a word for. He held his phone steady for about 3 seconds of clean, unobstructed footage. The image during those seconds is shaky but clear. 2 large, dark bipedal dogmen carrying a dead deer along the river's edge in broad daylight. Then the panic hit. His hands started shaking so badly the image blurred. His breathing got fast and loud enough that he could hear it echoing off the leaves around him. He ducked deeper into the brush and pulled branches across the lens, reddish stems and big green leaves flooding the foreground of the frame. Through the gaps in the foliage, he kept the phone recording. The image for the remaining 5 seconds is obscured, fractured, broken up by vegetation, but through the gaps you can still make out the shapes of the 2 dogmen moving through the shallows with the deer and crossing to the far bank and disappearing into the heavier brush on the other side. Then the clip cuts to black. 8 seconds total. Dale killed the recording because his breathing was so loud on the audio he was genuinely afraid the sound itself would carry across the water and give him away. I personally think the most important detail in this entire encounter is something that does not appear in the footage at all. Dale told the research team that contacted him later that while he was lying flat in the brush after the recording stopped, shaking and trying to control his breathing and pressing his face into the dirt, he heard movement on the far bank that did not match 2 creatures walking away. It matched 3. He is certain of this. 2 sets of heavy footfalls moving through brush, and a third, lighter and more deliberate, moving on a parallel track, slightly offset from the other 2. He believes there was a third dogman that he never got on camera, one that stayed in the tree line while the other 2 made the crossing, watching the riverbanks, watching the approaches, watching for exactly the kind of threat that Dale represented. A lookout, a sentry, a third member of the pack whose job was not to carry the kill but to make sure the carriers got across safely, because that is how a pack operates. You do not send your carriers across open ground without someone watching the perimeter. Any military unit knows this. Any wolf pack knows this. And these dogmen know it too. That tells you everything about what they are. They are not scavenging. They are not randomly wandering through the forest and stumbling across dead deer. They have assigned roles during a hunt. One scouts, 2 carry, or one stands overwatch while the others transit an exposed position. That is pack coordination at a level we associate with military tactics and advanced social predators, not with anything that is supposed to exist in these forests. And I have been saying this on this channel for a long time now, As I covered in my video about dogman pack behavior in Michigan, these dogmen are not solitary creatures. They operate in organized groups, they communicate, they assign roles, and they have a structure that we are only beginning to understand because we have only recently started taking the evidence seriously enough to look at it clearly. Dale lay flat in that brush for what he estimates was 45 minutes. He did not move. He did not adjust his position. He barely breathed. He kept his face pressed against the dirt and the damp leaves, and he listened. From across the river, carried on the still air through the silence that had not yet lifted, he heard sounds he did not want to hear. Movement through heavy brush, the crack and snap of branches being pushed aside by something large, and then a vocalization that changed the way he thought about everything. It was not a growl, it was not a bark, it was not a howl. It was a low, guttural, clipped sound, short, deliberate, repeated in a pattern that had variation and rhythm. Dale described it later as being like 2 quick syllables followed by a pause and then a single syllable. And then from a different position deeper in the trees, maybe 30 or 40 yards from the first sound, a response came. Different pitch, different pattern, but the same type of sound, the same structure. One dogman vocalizing and another dogman responding. A call and an answer that was too organized, too patterned, too intentionally varied to be random animal noise. Then silence, complete silence for 10 minutes. Then the birds came back. A kingfisher started working the shallows. A woodpecker tapped somewhere upstream. The forest filled back up with the small ordinary sounds that meant the world had returned to the version of normal that does not include 7-foot bipedal canids carrying deer across rivers. Dale waited another 20 minutes after the birds returned. He did not trust the silence to stay gone. He lay there and counted the bird calls and waited for them to remain consistent before he allowed himself to believe the dogmen were truly gone. He did not stand up. He crawled out of the brush on his hands and knees, staying below the sight line of the far bank, dragging his phone and tripod behind him through the dirt. He moved like that for 100 yards, a grown man in his mid-40s crawling on his belly through the forest like a soldier under fire, before he trusted his legs enough to stand, and when he stood, he ran. He ran the entire 20 minutes back to his truck without stopping, without pacing himself, without caring about the noise he made crashing through the underbrush. He said later that he did not look behind him once because he was afraid of what he might see if he did. At his truck, he locked the doors before he did anything else. Both doors. Then he sat in the driver's seat with his hands on the wheel and his heart hammering against his ribs and watched the tree line in his rearview mirror for a full 10 minutes, looking for movement, looking for shapes, looking for anything dark and upright stepping out of the forest and crossing the road toward his vehicle. Nothing came. He pulled up the footage on his phone. His hands were still trembling so badly he could barely hold the device steady enough to watch the playback. The video was shaky, partially obscured by leaves and stems for the last 5 seconds, but absolutely unambiguously clear in what it showed. 2 large bipedal dogmen carrying a dead deer across a river in broad daylight in the Pacific Northwest. He watched it 3 times sitting in that truck, with the engine running and the doors locked. Then he put the phone face down on the passenger seat, put the truck in gear, and drove home without playing it again. He did not tell his wife what happened. He walked in the door, sat down at the kitchen table and ate dinner and talked about normal things, and went to bed and lay awake until 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling and listening to every sound the house made. He did not tell anyone for 3 full days. He went to work, he came home, he ate dinner. He sat in front of the television without watching it. He did not sleep well. He replayed those 8 seconds in his head on a continuous loop, frame by frame, and he tried to convince himself he had filmed 2 men in elaborate costumes carrying a prop deer across a river at 3 in the afternoon for absolutely no reason in a location where nobody goes. He tested every alternative explanation he could generate. Hunters in ghillie suits, pranksters, some kind of elaborate film production. None of them held up under even basic scrutiny. He knew what he saw. He knew the way those dogmen moved was not human. The gait was wrong, digitigrade. The legs bending at angles human knees do not bend. The proportions were wrong. The arms hanging past where human arms end. The torso too deep from front to back. The heads were wrong, elongated, canine, with ears that tracked independently of the head's movement. And he knew that the way they gripped that deer with hands that flexed and adjusted their grip on uneven footing was not something a costume could replicate. Everything about those 8 seconds was wrong in a way that no rational explanation could fix. On the 3rd day, he sent the footage to one person, a friend who runs a small regional outdoors log, nature photography, hiking trails, fishing spots, gear reviews. Nobody famous, nobody with a large audience. Just a guy Dale trusted who knew the outdoors and who would not immediately call him crazy or post it on social media for laughs. The friend called him back within an hour. His first question was not "What is this?" or "Where did you film this?" His first question was, "Is this real?" Dale said yes. The friend went quiet on the line for a long time. Then he asked if he could post it on his blog. Dale said absolutely not. Not a chance. He asked the friend to send it instead to someone who would know what to do with it, someone who had experience with this kind of thing and who would take it seriously and protect his identity. That is how the footage reached a Dogman research group. I am keeping the name of the group vague at Dale's request, and I would ask you not to speculate in the comments because the last thing this man needs is internet detectives showing up at his river. They contacted him within days. He agreed to talk but set firm conditions. He refused to share his last name. He refused to give his exact location beyond a general area description. He refused to allow any detail that could lead someone, journalist, researcher, curious viewer, anyone, back to that stretch of river. He gave them the general area, a river corridor near the Oregon-Washington border. He gave them directions to the crossing point from a regional landmark. And he made one thing absolutely clear. He was not going back there. Not with them. Not with anyone. Not ever. A small team from the research group traveled to the area within 2 weeks of receiving Dale's footage. 3 people. Experienced field investigators who had documented dogman activity in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Northern California over the previous several years. They had seen tracks, heard vocalizations, investigated kill sites, and interviewed dozens of witnesses. They knew what they were looking for, and they knew how to document a site without contaminating the evidence. Dale gave them detailed directions to the crossing point but did not accompany them. He told them where to park, which trail to take, what landmarks to watch for, and where the elevated bank was that he used as his blind. Then he wished them luck and stopped answering his phone for a week. What they found at the crossing matched Dale's account in every measurable detail. The river stones in the shallows showed scoring marks, deep parallel scratches in the rock surface, consistent with large clawed feet gripping wet stone under significant weight. The marks were fresh, not weathered, not softened by algae growth or mineral deposits, and they followed a direct line across the crossing point at exactly the location Dale described the dogmen walking. The spacing between the marks matched a bipedal stride pattern with a step length far exceeding any known animal in the region. On the far bank, they found a game trail that had been widened significantly beyond anything deer or elk traffic would produce. There were no boot prints, no trail markers, no flagging tape, no sign of human recreational use. But something large had been using this trail regularly enough to push the brush back on both sides, bending and breaking vegetation at a height of 6 to 7 feet, forming a corridor through the forest that a tall, upright creature could walk through without ducking or pushing branches aside. The trail was not deer height, it was not bear height, it was dogman height. They followed the trail approximately 200 yards into the tree line away from the river. That is where they found the kill site, and the kill site is where this case crosses a line that I do not think we can walk back from. They found deer remains, but not scattered the way a bear kill looks, not torn apart and spread across a wide area the way a cougar kill degrades. When a bear takes down a deer, the scene is chaos. Fur ripped out in clumps, bones cracked open for marrow and thrown in every direction, Scavengers move in fast, ravens, jays, coyotes, insects, and the site becomes an unreadable mess within days. This was different. The bones were stripped clean of meat and piled, not tossed, not scattered, piled, stacked in a rough but clearly deliberate grouping against the base of a large fir tree, the long bones laid roughly parallel to each other, the smaller bones and vertebrae collected on top, and the hide. I have thought about this detail every single day since I first heard it, and I suspect once I tell you, you will not be able to stop thinking about it either. The hide was folded, not crumpled in a heap, not torn off in ragged, bloody pieces the way any known predator removes skin from a carcass. It was folded, laid flat on the forest floor and folded over once, neatly, deliberately, and set to the side of the bone pile as if someone had placed it there, because it was still useful, because it still had value, because whoever processed this planned to come back for it, or had a use for it that went beyond simple feeding. I need to stop here because this is the detail that keeps me up at night. Folded hide. I want you to think about what that means. That is not predator behavior. No wolf folds a hide. No bear folds a hide. No cougar. No coyote. No known carnivore on this continent or any other continent processes a kill by carefully removing the skin intact, folding it, and setting it aside for later use. That is processing. That is butchering. That is what a human hunter does when they take a deer in the field. They skin it carefully because the hide has value, for leather, for insulation, for trade, for a dozen practical applications. They set the hide aside, and they break down the carcass methodically, because they are not just eating, they are harvesting. They are extracting maximum value from the animal they killed. Whatever these dogmen are, they are not just killing to eat and walking away from the leftovers. They are using the animal. They are processing the kill with forethought and material awareness and what I can only call economic thinking, the understanding that different parts of the animal serve different purposes and should be handled accordingly. And that level of behavior, that level of planning and categorization and resource management is not in any wildlife textbook on the planet. It is not in any zoology paper ever published. It is not in any database of known animal behavior anywhere in the world, because this is not animal behavior. This is something else entirely. The team documented everything: photographs, measurements, GPS coordinates, soil samples from the kill site, hair fibers caught in the bark of nearby trees where something large had brushed past. They found tracks near the kill site and along the game trail, bipedal prints with canid toe structure and deep claw impressions at the front of each toe, approximately 16 inches long with a stride length that, based on standard biomechanical calculations used by forensic analysts and wildlife biologists, suggests a creature standing somewhere north of 7 feet tall, moving at a casual, unhurried walk. They found 3 distinct sets of tracks in overlapping patterns around the kill site and along the trail. 3 dogmen, 3 separate individuals with slightly different print sizes and weight distributions. Exactly the number Dale believed he had encountered at the river. The team set up 4 trail cameras in the area, standard practice for any field investigation of this kind. They positioned them at intervals along the game trail, at the crossing point, and bracketing the kill site. Professional-grade cameras with infrared motion triggers and silent shutters, the same models used by state wildlife agencies and university research programs for monitoring sensitive species. These are not cheap consumer cameras you buy at a sporting goods store. These are serious instruments designed specifically to capture footage of animals that are extremely sensitive to human presence without alerting them. Within 3 days, 2 of the 4 cameras were destroyed, not knocked over by wind, not bumped off their mounts by a wandering bear scratching its back on a tree trunk, pulled from their tree mounts, physically removed from the straps and brackets that secured them, and smashed on the ground. The plastic housings were cracked open, the mounting brackets were bent and twisted, and the SD cards, the small memory cards that contained whatever those cameras had recorded during their 3 days of operation, were gone. Not in the wreckage, not on the ground nearby, not dropped in the leaf litter within a search radius. taken, removed from inside the cameras and carried away by whatever destroyed them. The other 2 cameras were still mounted on their trees, still powered on, still functional in every mechanical way, but they had been turned, physically rotated on their mounting straps so that the lenses faced away from the trail and toward the tree canopy above. They recorded hours of footage, leaves, branches, patches of sky, a squirrel running along a limb, nothing of investigative value, nothing that showed the trail or the crossing or anything moving through the area at ground level. This is exactly what happened in the case I covered in my Alaska Dogmen video, trail cameras being physically relocated, repositioned, or destroyed by dogmen who understood what the equipment was and what it was doing there. And it is a pattern that keeps showing up in completely independent investigations across the country. Alaska, Michigan, Wisconsin, now the Pacific Northwest. Different research teams in different states separated by thousands of miles, with no coordination between them, no shared methodology, no communication before or during their investigations, and no reason whatsoever to produce matching results unless the results reflect something that is actually happening. And the behavior is the same every single time. Dogmen recognize surveillance equipment. They understand that cameras are watching them and recording their activity. And they neutralize the threat. They either destroy the cameras and take the evidence, or they reposition the cameras so the evidence is never captured in the first place. Think about what that requires. Not just strength, though ripping a camera off a tree mount takes considerable force. It requires recognition. It requires understanding cause and effect. It requires knowing that the small box on the tree is different from the tree itself, and that it serves a specific purpose that is hostile to the dogman's interests. That is not an animal being startled by a strange object in its environment and swatting at it. That is a targeted, purposeful, intelligent response to a specific technology deployed against them. And the missing SD cards push it even further, because taking the card means understanding that the threat is not the camera housing, but the tiny removable component inside it that stores the data. That is a level of technological comprehension that we do not attribute to chimpanzees, to orangutans, to any non-human species on this planet. And yet, it is happening in our forests, documented independently by multiple research teams, and nobody in any position of authority is willing to talk about it. 6 weeks passed. Dale had told the research team, and he had told himself, and he had told the one friend who knew about the footage that he was done. He was not going back to that river. He was not going to think about those 8 seconds of video or the vocalizations he heard afterward or any of it. He was going to go back to his normal life and pretend that the world still operated the way he thought it operated before that afternoon in May. That resolution lasted about a month and a half before something pulled him back. He called it curiosity when he explained it to the research group later. I do not think it was curiosity. I think it was something deeper and less rational than that. I think it was the same compulsion that pulls people back to the places where they almost died. The need to stand at the edge of the thing that terrified you and prove to yourself that you are still here and it is not. He did not go to the original spot. He is not a fool. He went to a ridge about a quarter-mile upstream where the terrain rises steeply enough to give a clear line of sight down to the crossing point and the surrounding riverbanks. You can see the entire bend from up there, the shallows, the far bank, the tree line, the brush where he had hidden. He brought binoculars. He did not bring a camera. He told himself he was just going to look. Sit on that ridge for an hour, glass the crossing, confirm it was empty, confirm the dogmen were gone, confirm the world still made sense, and then drive home and put this behind him forever. First visit, nothing. Completely normal wildlife activity. Birds everywhere. A doe and her fawn drinking at the edge of the shallows, calm and unhurried. Otters rolling on the rocks downstream. The forest sounded exactly the way it was supposed to sound, full and alive and layered with the constant background noise of creatures living and feeding and calling to each other in every direction. He sat for 2 hours, glassed every inch of the far bank and the tree line, saw nothing unusual, and drove home feeling a relief so profound it almost made him dizzy. Maybe it was a one-time event. Maybe the dogmen had been passing through. Maybe it was over. Second visit, 3 days later. Same result. Completely normal. Quiet in the good way, the peaceful way. The version of quiet that means safety, rather than the dead silence that means run. He started to relax. He started to let himself believe that whatever pack had been using that stretch of river had moved on, pushed deeper into the backcountry by the investigation team's activity, or the disruption of their cameras, or simply the natural rotation of territory that large predators engage in over time. The third visit destroyed everything he had rebuilt in those 6 weeks. He arrived in the late afternoon, settled onto the ridge with his binoculars, and within 20 minutes the silence dropped. The same silence. The exact same sudden, total, crushing absence of every natural sound except the river. The birds stopped mid-song. The insects went dead. The air itself seemed to thicken. And Dale's stomach dropped through the floor because he knew instantly, without any ambiguity, what that silence meant. He knew he should get up and leave immediately. He knew it in his legs and his gut and every primitive warning system his body possessed. And he did not leave. He could not make himself move. He raised the binoculars and glassed the crossing. For several minutes, nothing. Empty shallows, still far bank, dark, motionless tree line. Then a single dogman stepped out of the trees. Just one. No deer, no second or third dogman, no pack formation. It walked to the water's edge in 4 or 5 unhurried strides and stopped. It did not cross the river. It did not lower its head to drink. It did not sniff the air or scan the banks or do any of the behavioral things an animal does when it approaches water. It stood there, fully upright, completely still, and it looked directly up the ridge at Dale's position. Dale was 400 yards away. He was behind cover. Heavy brush, broken terrain, elevation advantage. He was motionless. He was not silhouetted against the sky. He was using binoculars, not a scope with a reflective lens. There is no logical, rational, scientifically defensible explanation for how a dogman at 400 yards could identify a concealed, motionless human observer at that distance through that much visual obstruction. But it stared at his exact position, not the general ridgeline, not the trees to either side, but the precise spot where Dale was lying with glass pressed to his face. For what he counted as a full 2 minutes. Then it turned and walked back into the forest. No rush, no alarm, no sound, just a slow, deliberate, unhurried walk back into the trees, the same casual pace Dale had seen in the original footage. As if it had come to the river for the sole purpose of standing there and looking at him, and now that it had done that, there was no further reason to stay. Dale did not return after that. He called the research group that night and told them he was finished. He was done. He believed the dogmen knew the area was being watched and had known for some time, possibly since before the cameras were deployed. The crossing was no longer active. The pack had rerouted its movements, relocated its kill processing sites, changed its patterns, and that single dogman standing at the water's edge, motionless, staring 400 yards up a ridge at a concealed human position it should not have been able to detect, was not a coincidence. It was not a random animal wandering to the river. It was a message delivered with absolute precision to an audience of one. We know you are here. We see you. We have already moved. And you should leave now while leaving is still your choice. A lot of you have asked me after my recent videos whether I think dogmen are territorial. I do not just think they are territorial. I think they manage territory the way we manage property. They patrol boundaries. They monitor entry points. They track intrusions over time and differentiate between one-time trespassers and sustained surveillance. And when they detect a persistent threat, not a hiker walking through once, but a repeated systematic human presence in their operating area, they do not simply attack and they do not simply flee. They adapt. They relocate their operations. They change routes. They shift schedules. They abandon compromised sites and establish new ones. That is not fight or flight. That is strategic resource management. That is threat assessment and calculated behavioral modification. And the fact that a single dogman walked to a known compromised crossing point for the sole apparent purpose of confirming that the human was still watching tells me that their awareness of us, of our movements, our positions, our intentions, operates at a level so far beyond our awareness of them that the comparison is almost absurd. We think we are studying them. The reality is that they have been studying us the entire time. We are not the researchers in this dynamic. We are the subjects. I want to pull back from Dale's story now and talk about what this case tells us about dogman behavior in a broader sense, because I believe this encounter, even though most of you will never see the original footage, represents one of the most important pieces of field evidence we have collected for understanding what dogmen are, how they live, how they organize, and how they interact with the human world that sits on the edge of their territory. The 3 dogman formation. Dale encountered at that crossing 2 carriers and 1 probable sentry holding a perimeter position in the tree line, mirrors wolf-pack dynamics, but with a difference so fundamental that it changes the entire conversation about what these creatures are. Wolves hunt cooperatively. They coordinate, but they do it on 4 legs. They carry kills in their mouths and drag carcasses short distances to safe feeding areas. They do not walk upright on 2 legs and distribute the weight of a full-grown white-tailed deer between 2 individuals using their hands in a coordinated bipedal carry that mirrors the way 2 human beings transport heavy cargo. What Dale filmed is cooperative bipedal logistics with role specialization. 2 carriers, 1 security element. That is not instinct. That is organizational behavior. That is a skill that requires teaching, learning, practice, trust between individuals, and an understanding of roles within a group hierarchy. The complete absence of hesitation or awkwardness in the footage. The sheer mechanical ease of those 2 dogmen walking that deer across a river tells me this is not a recently developed behavior. This is deep practice. This is something that has been passed down through whatever social structure dogman packs maintain, refined over generations, integrated into a routine so thoroughly that it requires no conscious thought. That is culture. There is no other word for it. The fact that this happened in broad daylight matters more than it might seem at first. Most dogman encounters occur at night, late night, early morning, the darkest hours when concealment is easiest and human activity is lowest. Dale's sighting was at 3 in the afternoon under overcast skies. That break-in pattern tells us something significant about this particular pack. Either they are bold enough to operate in full visibility because they feel completely secure in their territory, or their hunting schedule is driven by prey movement rather than by a need to avoid human detection. I believe it is both. They have been using that corridor long enough to know when humans come and when they do not. They have mapped our patterns the way we map theirs, and they have determined that a weekday afternoon at a remote river crossing carries essentially 0 risk of human contact. They were right about that for years. Dale was a statistical anomaly. He was the 1 in 1,000 variable that their risk assessment did not account for. The river crossing functions as more than a transit point. It is a tactical asset. Deer are creatures of habit. They drink at the same locations, cross at the same shallows, follow the same trails between bedding and feeding areas, generation after generation. A predator intelligent enough to identify those patterns does not need to chase prey through dense forest where the outcome is uncertain. It can position itself at a predictable choke point and let the prey come to it, or it can use established crossings as transportation corridors for moving kills from hunting zones to processing areas. The scoring marks on the stones, the widened game trail, the kill processing site 200 yards in, this is not a random collection of evidence. This is an integrated hunting operation. Trail, crossing, kill site, processing area. A system. An infrastructure built up and maintained over time by something that understands the landscape, not as wilderness but as a workspace. The folded hide is the centerpiece of this case, and I think it is the single most significant piece of physical evidence I have ever discussed on this channel, because it proves something that no amount of eyewitness testimony or blurry footage can prove on its own. These dogmen are not just predators, they are producers. They do not just consume, they process. They differentiate between parts of a kill and handle them differently based on their perceived value. That is economic reasoning. That is material classification. That is a cognitive function that we have, until now, considered exclusively human or near human. I have spent months reading indigenous oral traditions from across this continent, Ojibwe, Salish, Nez Perce, Tlingit, and the accounts of creatures matching the dogman description consistently include references to tool use, food caching, hide processing, and resource management. For centuries, Western science dismissed those traditions as mythology, but the physical evidence from this investigation validates them point by point. The indigenous peoples of North America were not inventing stories about monster wolves. They were recording observational data about a species they coexisted with for thousands of years, and their observations are turning out to be accurate in ways that should humble every scientist who ever dismissed them. The trail camera evidence adds a layer that I think most people are not prepared to sit with. Dogmen not only detected the cameras, they assessed them, determined that two were more threatening than the others based on their positions, destroyed those two, removed and carried away the memory cards containing the evidence, and repositioned the remaining two so they would record nothing useful. That sequence of actions requires recognition, prioritization, understanding of internal components, and strategic decision-making. We are not talking about a bear rubbing against a tree and accidentally knocking a camera off. We are talking about a deliberate, multi-step response to a specific type of human technology by a non-human intelligence that understood the purpose of that technology well enough to defeat it systematically. I do not know how to talk about that without using words that the scientific establishment is not ready to hear. But the evidence does not care whether the establishment is ready or not. It simply is what it is. I have been covering dogmen on this channel for a while now, and I need to be direct with you about something. This case changed me. It changed how I think about dogmen at a fundamental level. I used to operate under the assumption that we were dealing with an apex predator, something at the top of a food chain we did not know existed. Big, fast, dangerous, terrifying to encounter, but ultimately an animal, operating on sophisticated instinct, yes, impressive instinct, but instinct nonetheless. I cannot hold that position anymore, not after this. Because what Dale filmed was not an animal feeding. It was a logistics team executing a coordinated transport operation in broad daylight with security protocols in place. What the researchers found at the kill site was not a predator's feeding ground. It was a processing facility. What the trail cameras revealed was not random wildlife interference. It was counter-surveillance conducted with precision, selectivity, and technological understanding. Those three data points, cooperative transport, systematic processing, and targeted neutralization of monitoring equipment, do not describe an animal. They describe an intelligent species, an organized, adaptive, strategic intelligence that lives in our forests, operates in our margins, monitors our behavior, and has so far managed to avoid every attempt we have made to document it definitively. And that realization, the understanding that there is something out there that is not human but is intelligent in ways that overlap with human cognition, is the most unsettling thing I have ever had to say on this channel. Here is where things stand as of the time I am recording this. Dale still lives in his town near the Oregon-Washington border. He still drives past the pull-off, where he used to park on his way to work every single morning. He does not stop. He sold his camera equipment. All of it, lenses he spent years saving for, a tripod his wife gave him for his birthday, the whole kit. About 6 months after the encounter, he told the research team he no longer films wildlife. He did not explain why. I do not think he needed to. The research team still has the footage. It has not been released publicly. Dale has asked that it remain private, and the team has honored that without hesitation. They have shared still frames with a small number of investigators in the dogman research community, and I understand those stills have circulated in closed groups, but the full 8-second video remains locked. I have seen the stills. I have spoken at length with 2 of the 3 people who went to the site. Everything I have told you today is consistent across every source I have been able to check. I cannot show you the footage, but I can tell you it exists. And I can tell you that the people who have seen it do not argue about what it shows. The crossing point has been monitored remotely since the initial investigation. No further dogman activity has been recorded there. The game trail is growing over. The scoring marks on the river stones are softening under seasonal water. The kill site has been reclaimed by the forest floor, moss, ferns, leaf litter, the slow, quiet machinery of decomposition erasing every trace. Within another year, there will be no physical evidence that anything out of the ordinary ever happened at that location. The forest is very good at this. It always has been. It buries its secrets under layers of green and lets time do the rest. But the broader region tells a different story if you know what questions to ask and who to ask them of. Hunters in the area have reported a measurable decline in deer sightings over the past 2 seasons. Fewer animals at established feeding areas. Fewer does with fawns in spring. Fewer bucks during the rut. Fish and Wildlife has attributed the decline to natural population fluctuation and increased cougar activity following 2 consecutive mild winters. That explanation satisfies the paperwork and closes the file. No one in any official capacity has looked at those numbers and asked whether something else, something that hunts in organized packs, processes kills at dedicated sites, and operates with enough intelligence to evade every form of detection we have deployed, might be pulling deer out of the population at a rate that known predators cannot explain. No one is going to ask that question, because asking it means considering an answer that no state wildlife agency, no federal bureau, and no career official is prepared to put their name on. Dale shared one final thing during his last conversation with the research team, and it is the detail I keep coming back to whenever I think about this case, which is more often than I would like to admit. He said the thing that haunts him is not the footage. It is not the dogman's size or their upright gait, or the way they carried that deer, or the way one of them stared him down from 400 yards. It is the sound, the vocalizations he heard after the clip ended, that low, structured, rhythmic exchange between 2 dogmen on the far bank, the call and the response, because it was not a growl. It was not a bark or a howl or any vocalization he had ever heard from any animal in a decade of sitting in those woods. It had structure, it had rhythm, it had intentional variation, pitch changes, tempo shifts, patterns that repeated and then broke and reformed. And it sounded, Dale said, choosing his words carefully, repeating them twice to make sure the interviewer recorded them exactly, like 2 people having a short conversation in a language he had never heard before. He could not understand what they were saying. He could not parse meaning from the syllables. But he knew, the way you know certain things, before your rational mind has had time to process the evidence, that those 2 dogmen were exchanging specific information, coordinates, status updates, an all-clear signal, something real and precise and meaningful that passed between 2 minds that understood each other perfectly and had no idea, or did not care, that a 3rd mind was lying in the bushes 40 yards away, listening to every sound they made and understanding none of it. If you have made it this far, I want you to sit with one thought before you close this video. Dale was 40 yards away from 3 dogmen, and he survived because the wind happened to be blowing in the right direction on an overcast afternoon in May. That is it. That is the complete total margin between him sitting in his kitchen, right now living his life, and him being a missing person case that never gets solved, a name on a flyer stapled to a telephone pole near a trailhead, where nobody saw anything and nobody heard anything, and the forest swallowed whatever happened and grew over it before anyone thought to look. He did not outsmart them. He did not outrun them. He did not scare them off with noise or size or technology. He got lucky with wind. That is the only reason he is alive to have this story told. And somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, right now, as you are listening to this, there is a pack of dogmen that has moved deeper into that river corridor, that has established new crossing points and new kill sites and new routes that no one has found yet, and that is still hunting, still carrying deer across rivers in daylight with the calm efficiency of something that has never been challenged, still communicating in vocalizations we cannot translate, still pulling cameras off trees and walking away with the evidence, still watching us from distances and positions where we will never see them watching. The only question is whether the next person who wanders into their territory will be as lucky as Dale was. For more stories like this, consider subscribing.